Welcome to the At the Coalface podcast with your host, Jason Greenwood. This podcast is all about what it's really like in the trenches of digital and e-commerce. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the podcast. It's good to have you along for the ride today. It's my pleasure to welcome Mark Presnell from Convergence to the pod. Welcome, Mark.
Thanks, Jason. Good to be here.
Super cool to have you here. We've been meaning to do this for quite some time. We've talked about it. We've thrown things over the fence to each other a few times, and we never really made it happen. So I decided now's the time. Today's the day, and it's super cool to have you on the podcast.
Indeed. Yeah, you're right. We have talked about it for a while, so I'm really looking forward to this.
Look, it's so cool to have you on because you are the founder and MD of Convergence, and Convergence is what I like to think of as a hybrid technology company, meaning you have a SaaS platform, but you also have both professional and managed services wrapped around this SaaS platform. And that's a model I'm seeing more and more of in the market. I had the guys from FormToro on before, and they have effectively a zero-party data SaaS tool that can be plugged into an e-commerce website, or it can be plugged into any website, but they don't sell that platform, or they don't allow a merchant to use that platform without their services wrapped around it, because they know that the customer will not get the best out of that platform unless they also engage their services layer. And so that I'm seeing this trend happen more and more in the market, and I'm guessing you are too.
Yes, and it's interesting you say that, because we've naturally always thought we need to become an end user tool that a client could just jump on a dashboard and say, I want to integrate this with that, and click a few buttons and away she goes. But there is actually a lot more to it. And the people who have been down the track of integration of any kind, I would say, but as you add endpoints into it, things can become a lot more complex. But any type of integration, usually what people find is there's a devil in the detail. There's a lot more to it, and things can become quite complex quite quickly. There are platforms, obviously, that allow you to do simple integrations, and they have pre-cooked connectors that make this talk to that, and it will do a certain number of things and nothing outside that. And so doing anything more involved, anything more complex, typically does require quite an intensive, well, I won't say intensive, but quite an in-depth services engagement.
Absolutely. And so for the benefit of the people that are listening, your company name is Convergence, but you've got this SaaS platform called CODI, which is an integration middleware platform, or an iPaas integration platform as a service, which allows multiple technology platforms, mostly SaaS platforms we're seeing today emerge from the market. Could be an e-commerce system, could be an ERP, could be a CRM, could be almost any operational business system. Your platform sits in the middle as the traffic cop and allows these systems to talk to each other and share data with one another.
Correct. Yes. CODI essentially stands for Convergence Optimized Data Integration. And it's exactly that. It's that traffic cop in the middle, if you wish. So there's really two components or two elements to CODI. So there's the actual CODI core engine, which is where all the intelligence sits in the center, in the middle, if you wish. And then there are connectors into various different endpoints. So a lot of our clients start off with two endpoints. They have an e-commerce website, and they have an ERP or an inventory management or an accounting software. But then we have many clients too that have multiple endpoints. They have PLM, they have freight companies, they have CRMs, they have a bunch of other multiple websites that all need to exchange data. And that's where CODI really excels in terms of its flexibility and its scalability to allow basically any number of endpoints, any volume of data to be exchanged and synchronized and be automatically or automagically kept up to date, as we like to say.
And what I've seen in the industry over the last, say, 10 plus years, when I first started out in this industry, we would do web projects or e-commerce projects. There were many projects that didn't require system integration. There was no expectation that these various systems could talk to each other. And so either there just wasn't enough systems that needed to be integrated, or what a lot of businesses were doing is they were maybe exporting an Excel file out of one system and importing it into another system manually. So they were literally manually going into admin, downloading and re-uploading into another system. And so what I've seen over the last 10 years plus is that there's virtually no project that I'm involved with today, whether that's an e-commerce project or an ERP CRM. Doesn't really matter if it's a tech platform that is being implemented or is being expected to work with other systems within an ecosystem of applications. There is literally not a single project today that I work on that doesn't involve an element of integration. And have you seen the demand for your technology and your services? Have you seen that demand from the market grow over the last 10 years just as much as I have?
Absolutely. And I think it's a matter of you don't know what you don't know. So those website projects in the early days basically just didn't know that there were other options. And even today, when we first engage with clients from time to time, we ask them, have you had any integration previously? Have you got any integration in place currently? And some of them are going, yep, we do. And when we ask, well, how does it work? Okay, export a CSV file from here, and then we import it there. And that's really not integration. So it is manual, it's very error prone, and it's very clunky. But that is what people understood to be integration back in the day. So now we're talking about webhooks, we're talking about all sorts of methods into databases directly or into applications and APIs that allow us to exchange data and make sure that everything is kept up to date and in sync. So I think in particular, over the last 2 years, going back further, as you say, but in the last 2 years with the pandemic really driving online business, we've seen a huge demand for our services. And it's been actually fantastic to work with companies who've been forward thinking and have seen, okay, we've got a serious challenge here. We need to adjust our business model. We need to be really slick online. And if we're doing that, then, they're going to see a lot more data flowing and a lot more data that needs to be updated instantly. And that is what will ultimately drive customer experience and allow people to see availability of product, see good product information in the first instance on those websites, and also know that when they're ordering a product, that product is actually in stock. It hasn't been sold out in the meantime and so forth. There's all those sort of scenarios that can be avoided by having that integration in place. Absolutely. With the online business growth, the need and the awareness around integration of those websites out there to be connected to the business inside is definitely growing.
And as you rightly point out, there's not only different methods of integrating. So some systems have an API layer that you can have access to. Some of them only can spit out a CSV or an Excel file that then gets dumped on a server somewhere that you can pick up as part of integration. Some systems facilitate EDI or electronic data interchange, and they have a special format for that data. There's REST APIs, SOAP APIs. There's almost as many integration methodologies and formats under the sun as there is systems to make it happen. But if we unpick that a little bit further and we move beyond how the data gets moved between systems, because that gets quite technical in nature, let's talk about, for the average e-commerce business, what type of data is typically integrated. With what I've seen, and I'll look for you to validate this, there's four, maybe five key pieces of information in a quote unquote fully integrated environment. So there's usually products into the e-commerce platform from an ERP or a PIM. It usually includes attributes, images, et cetera, et cetera. So all of the product data, including inventory. And then we have orders down, so orders going down from the e-commerce platform or the marketplace into the e-com platform into a back office system like an ERP. We then have inventory gets updated in near real time or close to real time, usually again between the ERP and the e-commerce platform and any other sales channels like ePaas, point of sale systems, etc. And then we have shipments. So once a order is dispatched, usually in an OMS or WMS or again in the ERP, then the shipment information has to be shipped back up to the e-commerce platform or other system so that the transactional messaging can be sent to the customer and they know where that order is at all times along its life cycle with the business of fulfillment. So those are the kinds of things I'm saying: products coming in, inventory being updated in near real time, orders coming down, shipments going up. And then the final one is customers. And that one can be sometimes one way, can sometimes be two way, depending on the business model, whether that be B2B or B. Usually the customer would arrive in the business via the e-com platform or via point of sale and then be integrated down into the ERP so that orders can be registered against them or lodged against them. In a B2B environment, though, What I'm saying is more often than not, those B2B customers originate in the ERP system or the CRM system, then they're created in the e-commerce platform with their appropriate pricing levels and price lists, etc., so that when they log in on the front end, they are engaging with the business under their trade terms and price lists, etc., through every single channel, including their digital channels. So those are the main set of integrations that I'm seeing are the most common. Is that what you're seeing with most of the projects you work with?
Absolutely. Look, you've hit the nail on the head there. And we generally talk about 3 data flows going, say, from the ERP or from the business software up to the e-commerce website. If we're talking about that sort of point-to-point model for a moment, those 3 areas are usually product attributes, and that can become quite complex. So essentially what we like to recommend, or what we suggest and regularly achieve, is that all the product attributes maintenance can happen in the business software, in the ERP or inventory management software, so that basically a client wouldn't have to then jump on the website and add an image or add a YouTube link or add a PDF or something. All of that should be able to be maintained and managed from the ERP, from the inventory side, and then from there synced out to the website. We often work with clients around how, for example, product variants are handled. For example, same product, different color, size combinations, and so forth. Because in each ERP or inventory system, typically those would be standalone products and they've got no relationship, no connection whatsoever. So we work around linking of those products to make sure that on the website you can now show that business shirt and have drop downs for color and for size and so forth. And then also things like categories. Where does a product appear on the website? Quite often it's important for customers to be able to find products in multiple locations. They may be looking for a set of gloves under clothing, for example, or apparel, and they may also be looking for gloves under safety or other headings. So it's a matter of working through those product attributes and working with the client, advising them also where those attributes should best be set up so that they can be easily maintained going forward, both for existing products and for new products. So that's the bulk of the information that usually needs to go up to the website under that heading of product attributes, including, as you said, inventory, so stock on hand. Multiple warehouses, for example, when they have different fulfillment points. They may have a warehouse in the South Island of New Zealand and want to fulfill orders to, say, customers in Christchurch from that location, whereas for customers up north, they fulfill from Auckland and so forth. So all of those rules, business rules, need to be taken into consideration as well. So the second attribute, or the second area of data that we typically upload to the website, would fall under what we call customers or debtors, and really only comes into play for B2B scenarios. And that's where advanced pricing, so multiple price levels or even contract rates of pricing, where a supplier, say an online vendor, has agreed special pricing with a customer for a certain product or product range. And then whenever they log on to the website, they need to be able to see that specific pricing. Attributes or debtors attributes can include things like credit limits. They can include things like delivery addresses if the company has several branches or locations where they want to receive stock. So it's all of those attributes that are then put out to the front end, so that when that client logs in, they are essentially able to place orders as if they are talking to a rep or to someone over the phone, where they're placing their order, seeing their specific pricing. They're able to potentially see what stock is available and so forth. And then, of course, as you were saying, orders coming the other way. So any online sales transactions that are completed on the website are then synced down. And for, as you say, B2C customers, those details are brought along. Typically, those are then lumped into a cash sale account or a web sales account from a financial revenue recognition perspective. But the customer details are obviously available for further marketing purposes and so forth. For trade customers, for those B2B customers, all of the revenue is, of course, logged against that specific debtors account. So it's basically as if they are trading with that client face-to-face, but they can now do that 24/7 and receive their special pricing as and when required when they're looking up quoting or placing orders.
And one of the things that I'm seeing as an emerging and very becoming more common design pattern is to have the base information of a product. So the name, the SKU, the price, the inventory, all that stuff maybe come from an ERP, but then have all the enriched product data sitting in a PIM or product information management system. I know that what's becoming a lot more common is to have that base product data go from the ERP into the PIM. It'd be further enriched in the PIM by, say, a marketing team with all of the imagery, descriptions, product attributes, structured and unstructured product data, tech sheets, PDFs, et cetera, videos, all the rest of the enrichment, the engaging enrichment piece that needs to be on the front end from a digital perspective. That all happens through a workflow management process that most ERPs aren't really well set up to do. And so that happens in a PIM, but on an ongoing basis, the integration will talk directly from the ERP to the website for two things: price and inventory. So prices will come in near real time from the ERP, as will inventory, and be updated directly to the e-commerce platform because the PIM system doesn't need to know anything about that. And then all of the other attributes, as they get updated out of the PIM system, then they are sent down to the exact same product based on a SKU level match down into the e-commerce platform from the PIM system. So that's a very common emerging design pattern that I'm seeing. And is that something you guys are seeing in some of the integrations you've had to work with?
Absolutely. And I would say that there's more and more of that happening. It would probably also be fair to say that for a lot of smaller businesses, a PIM hasn't yet been in play frequently, but that is changing. And it's driven by exactly what you just said, that additional enrichment of product data that typically isn't straightforward or easy to manage through an ERP or even an accounting or inventory software. So it's allowing those additional attributes and approval cycles and workflows around those to be maintained or managed in a PIM, and then for that information to be merged and married into the data stream that essentially feeds the website. Yeah, more and more of that happening, definitely.
And are you seeing another trend that I'm starting to see emerge as well, which is historically, let's say for, I don't know, the last 10 years, the lion's share of my work has been very much focused on B2C, D2C, and those types of merchants that are selling directly as a retailer to an end customer. They might be a pure play online business. They might be an omnichannel business with physical stores and online. They might sell through multiple digital channels, including marketplaces, but for all intents and purposes, they are a retailer. They might be a manufacturer selling direct to end consumers, but they are still a retailer in one description or another. But what I'm starting to see now is that the B2B world is starting to catch on to the benefits of digital sales channels. They're starting to receive pressure from their B2B customers, not end consumers now, but their B2B customers. They're starting to get pressure from them to implement e-commerce functionality and self-service e-commerce portal functionality so that they can actually log in, and they can, if it's 11 o'clock at night and they're sitting on their couch, they can log in and they can place their B2B orders through a B2B website portal. They can see their prices, as you say, etc. And there is this expectation now, an increasing expectation, that you won't just have, as a B2B business, field sales reps, BDRs, BDMs, account managers, that you won't just have that model of engaging with B2B customers, that there is that growing expectation that you will have a self-service e-commerce website with all of the beautiful functionality of a traditional B2C e-commerce website, with merchandising and all of the personalization functionality, all of the brilliant imagery and descriptions, and all of the things that you would expect experientially from a B2C website. Now, B2B customers are expecting all of that, plus all the additional B2B functionality layered on top. And I'm seeing that become much more of a normal expectation. I think, particularly over the last couple of years, that has become a much more, it's a massive growth area of e-commerce, because B2C is so mature, right? B2B is very immature when it comes to e-commerce. And so when you start talking to them about it, and then you start talking to them about how their systems can be integrated to make their life easier, their eyes light up because they've just never heard this kind of talk before. Is that what you're seeing?
Absolutely. And I think there is a massive opportunity in the B2B space. And it's exactly as you just said. Most websites traditionally have been B2C focused. And so those platforms that people are used to weren't really suited to trade pricing, to price levels, quantity breaks, and facilitating advanced features like that. But now we're seeing really a lot of interest in that space. And I was just the other day talking to one of our B2B clients who's actually said having the B2B site up for them now is allowing them to save a huge amount of time and cost of orders being placed through traditional channels, either by sending in emails with attachments and what have you with 20,000 order lines or whatever, but also for reps to be able to focus more on training and building the relationship with the client rather than just taking orders. So they can actually spend quality time with customers rather than just being out and constantly pushing something on them. But they are focusing on, when they do go and see clients, they're focusing on teaching them how to use the website, how to find products, how to place orders, how to handle returns, and all of those things that are facilitated now through websites. So it's really a change in the B2B way of doing business. And that expectation has been set, or the bar has been set by what's available in B2C and has been for a long time.
Couldn't agree more. And the other thing, when it comes to integration of B2B e-commerce websites and back office systems like ERP, what I'm seeing is that the integration requirements in that environment tend to be much more complex than in the B2C world. And so where in the B2C world, you maybe could get away with some things not being integrated and doing them manually, you definitely in most instances cannot get away with that same level of manual integration, for lack of a better term, as you could in B2C. And now, because of the expectations of the B2B consumer from an e-commerce perspective, things like being able to request a quote and then the quote being integrated down to the ERP so the sales rep can respond to that quote in the ERP with guaranteed trade pricing, then have that automatically synced back to the website so the customer gets a response. Yes, here's your quote. All you gotta do is click here and execute the transaction. Things like tiered accounts where you have a senior manager, senior buyer, junior buyer, etc. You have multiple accounts nested underneath one parent B2B customer account. And so therefore you've got to take all of that into account in the integration of customers from the ERP to the e-commerce website to make that happen seamlessly. Then you've got all those custom payment methods that B2B customers oftentimes expect, being able to pay via wire transfer and being able to pay on account and based on statements as opposed to paying upfront in advance, which is how most B2C websites operate. That payment is taken in advance before the product is ever shipped to them. And so there are some distinctive additional layers of complexity, even down to the catalog level, because in the B2B world, oftentimes the B2B customer will only have access to a certain segment or portion or category of the catalog. So we've got to control that as well, so that when they log in, they can't see everything that every other B2B customer sees. They see the stuff that they're authorized to purchase at their purchase price, and that it's not cluttered up with everything else that's in the catalog. And so there are quite a few additional complexities in the B2B world that really it would be almost impossible to function without integration to make that happen.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think things like, for example, what we call product access control for B2B websites is now definitely a happening thing. For example, for branded products, if you're selling uniforms and you've got customer logos on that uniform, for example, you wouldn't need to show that or want to show that to any other customers. So when they log in, only those clients can see those products. So it's really customizing and specializing the experience that those trade customers have when they purchase online. And that requires obviously a lot more data to be managed and maintained and kept up to date. So yeah, I don't see how that would be possible without some degree of integration. And we're finding quite often now when we're talking to clients, they may have already had a first-gen integration where they're doing things at a certain level, but have simply outgrown that complexity and now are going to the next level where they're saying we need to have not just this talking to that, but we need to have our ERP, our quoting system, a freight handling system, warehouse and fulfillment all tied into the process so that we can actually supply information to clients now to say your order has been picked, your order has been shipped. It's that customers expect all of that to be available for them when they log into the website to see where's my order, or for them to be able to go back and say, I need an invoice from earlier in this year. Traditionally, you'd have to phone and ask someone for an old invoice or a statement. All of these things now, including offline sales transactions, by the way, should be available and can be made available online through integration. Pulling out historical invoices of non-website sales transactions and making those available online is now part of what we do on a regular basis with B2B clients. It's simply and not acceptable. If you say to a client, well, if you go and look at your order history on the website, you're only going to see your online orders. Any orders that you placed over the phone or via email or through whatever other channel will not be included there. So it's an incomplete order history. And so that's not cutting it. It's also things like putting together bundles of products that belong together and that are often purchased as kit sets or as BOMs, if you wish, bills of materials, where products are grouped together to provide a solution. So all of those arrangements, all of those complexities need to be made available to the front end, and that is best achieved through clever integration.
And one of the other areas that I'm seeing that B2C traditionally doesn't even ever have to think about at least on an individual customer basis, they never have to think about is MOQs or minimum order quantities. And this is something that, from my experience, is absolutely becoming a de facto standard inside the B2B space. And sometimes those MOQs are down to an individual customer level. Sometimes they're down to a specific product or category level. Sometimes they're down to a specific tier or tiered pricing based on the MOQ at each tier. So there's and sometimes there is an indent model whereby it's a collective MOQ across the entire customer base, which says, okay, if all of our customers order enough of this product, we're going to go away and we're going to manufacture it and fulfill those orders after they've been made. So there's many permutations that I'm seeing of that MOQ model or minimum order quantity model in the market that, again, this is the kind of thing that B2C traditionally never has to think about, or they might have an MOQ that's a product, but that's every single customer has the exact same MOQ in a B2C world, or maybe they've got tiered pricing that's the same tiered price for every single customer that visits the website. But in B2B, you get various different combinations of these requirements mixed together and combined with products access control, combined with the customer hierarchy management. And when you combine those three things together, it can get pretty complex pretty damn fast.
Absolutely. No, you're absolutely right. And I think ultimately integration is all about reducing or eliminating complexity of data management or data maintenance. So any systems that need to exchange data in a process, in a business scenario, are candidates for integration. You just look at the amount of manual handling of data in any business. You can see that there's a whole lot of time being spent internally that is non-productive, that is just keeping things up to date or updating someone that something has changed. All of that can be automated, and then huge amounts of resources can be released to higher quality, higher value tasks, ultimately improving customer service and improving the customer experience.
And how did you guys decide? Let's talk about the tech for just a moment. How did you guys arrive at the decision to build out your own iPaas, your own middleware technology? There's other technologies, other platforms in the market, other SaaS platforms, Patchworks and MuleSoft and Boomi, and there's iPaas platforms in the market today. It's the market is almost awash with them. And so I'd be interested in how you guys arrived at a place where you went, that's great. There's some good technology out there. It does some pretty cool stuff, but it doesn't necessarily work for us as a business and the clients we're working with. So as opposed to buy, we're going to build instead. And that's a big decision to take on as a service provider, because most of what you guys do is under a professional services model. You got project work that you're doing with clients and then put them on managed services once they're live. That's a pretty big bite to take out of the apple if you want to build your own technology at the same time you're delivering services to clients.
I think it goes back to our roots, which have always been in software development. So we have been, this is our 25th year in business. And so we've always developed software. And when we saw, okay, there's a repetitive pattern emerging here across a number of clients that we started working with, when we first started getting into e-commerce integrations, we thought, okay, this is an ideal opportunity to build a platform. And that gives us now the maximum flexibility and control over that software if we want to move it in a certain direction or add certain functionality or features or customize it to meet a customer's unique requirements. We can do that. So that is the short answer to that. There's obviously a longer term play here in terms of building a platform that is used by a number of clients and ultimately partners once we get to that point to bring on development partners who may want to implement solutions using our CODI platform. For right now, we do it ourselves, and it gives us just the greatest flexibility and the greatest control over that software platform if we own it ourselves.
Makes sense. You don't want to ever have to tell a client no because your platform doesn't do what the client needs it to do. So I guess you're in a position where you, within reason, as long as the client's got a reasonable expectation of budget and timeline, you never have to say no. And really, it just comes down to what do they need integrated? How is it going to work? Which direction is the data going to flow? Why does it flow that way? What are the triggers going to be, etc. And I think we're entering into an era now, as I see it anyway, where integration is becoming significantly more consistent, at least in the methodologies and the languages that are being spoken for integration. Whereas in the old days, or at least in the transition from mostly on-premise software to now what I would consider a world where most software is delivered in a SaaS model, software as a service model, where by definition, SaaS platforms are API enabled. They have to be. So in the what I call the bad old days of software, many technology platforms that were on premise, they didn't have an API layer at all. They had no well-established common methodology of getting data out of those platforms and back into those platforms. And so it was always a Herculean effort to figure out how we were going to get data in and out of these systems. And it would oftentimes devolve down to a CSV export and import exercise mediated by a platform like yours. But what I'm seeing now is the getting ultra creative with integration methodologies. The need to do that is decreasing. And the reason that's decreasing is because of the rise of SaaS software and the slow dying away of on-premise as a standard method of software delivery. Is that a model you're seeing just become almost de facto common in the marketplace?
Yeah, I think there is definitely a strong drive towards that, but I think there's also a lot of on-premise applications that are sitting there that have APIs, or where we need to even talk directly to databases to push and pull data in and out of those applications. And that's an area actually that we find ourselves quite strong in. So a lot of people have invested a lot of money in customizing their ERP that runs on a server on-prem, or even if it's a hosted server, but it is essentially an application that they have customized to meet their specific business requirements for whatever reason. And now they're moving into online business and really want that all to be tied together and integrated. And often there aren't standard APIs. There aren't a whole lot of documented methods of how we get data in and out of those applications. And we actually need to engage at a far deeper level, say right down to database levels where we're pulling the data in and out of those systems. But I'd say you're right. Overall, there is a trend, obviously, to more and more SaaS applications that have good APIs and have good methods of exchanging data, but there's certainly still a lot of on-premise applications out there that we enjoy integrating with.
Love it. Mark, we've covered a lot of territory in a very short period of time. What would be your advice if a business out there either doesn't have any system integration today or limited or legacy system integration in their business? What should they be looking for in both a partner that they may want to work with to help them manage their system integration, and or a technology platform that would sit in the middle and be the traffic cop? What are the types of things? Obviously, you've got a dog in this fight, but just generically speaking, and obviously, someone in a different country, in the United States or something like that, they may be wanting to find someone local to them for whatever reason that they would want to work with in a capacity of an integration partner. So what are the types of things that you would advise generically a merchant to look for, or a business to look for, even if they're not selling through a website, when they're looking at taking on? Because this is almost like your e-commerce development agency. It's like a marriage, right? You're not going to rip and replace every couple of years your e-commerce technology, and therefore you're going to be joined at the hip to whoever you partner with. And it's the same with integration. Integration is probably even more deeply embedded in the business than just a single application, and it becomes an essential part of the business and its efficiency and its scalability. And so you really truly are married to your system integration, typically for very long periods of time. And so what would be your advice to brands out there wanting to integrate and automate their systems?
First of all, I'd say you're right. We tend to work with clients for long periods of time. And quite often we see those clients actually replacing endpoints. By endpoints of their website, for example, they may go from a Shopify site to a BigCommerce site, or from a WooCommerce site to a Shopify site, or whatever, but they may be replacing those endpoints. They may replace their ERP system with something else. So whatever they're going to be using. So the first thing there would be to look at, obviously, whether that endpoint, those applications, provide the ability for third-party connectivity through APIs to be supported. So that would be the first thing. But even before that, I would suggest that the key thing is to look at, well, which business processes would we want to automate, and is it worth automating them? We've had several conversations with clients, for example, where the business process that they came to us with it and said they want to automate this and they want an integration that will do this without any human intervention required. When we sit down and actually look at the feasibility of it, it might be something that is, for example, an unpleasant or unpopular activity within their team, but it's something that only happens once a quarter or once a month or something, and doesn't even take that long. So it doesn't really warrant an investment in an integration. So it's finding business processes where you can see there is a business case there to actually invest in the integration to be set up to automate that process and make it happen automatically going forward, as we like to say. I think next would really be down to finding people who understand the technology space and have worked in that space for a long enough time to understand how these things need to work. There's also the element of consulting and advice around data structure itself. It's not a purely technical experience to set up an integration. A backroom coder or a backroom developer on their own will not be the best choice of partner to actually work with there. You'd need a team of people who understand how business processes work and can advise you on how to structure data, how to look at automating those processes so that it actually saves a lot of time and helps your business improve in terms of efficiencies and the customer service that you're delivering. So I think it's finding the processes, the right processes that you want to automate, finding the right people, the right team that you want to work with, and ultimately then also the technology stack that you're going to be working on. As you said, there are quite a number of platforms out there. A lot of them have significant price tags attached to them, and others are too simple for what they are intended to do. So it's finding the right match, the right fit in terms of those technologies, the people, and the processes that you're going to be working through.
Sounds a similar process to almost any technology and partner decision. Very similar, right? Like you've got to find that balance. You got to strike a balance between the size and scale of the solution to match the size and scale and requirements of your business. And that's where I think, as you say, I think getting expert advice, whether it be from a consultancy or whether it be from an agency or whether it be from someone like you who works in the space on a regular basis, being able to get that expert advice from someone who has a few gray hairs on their head, who's done this more than one time, more than 10 times, more than 20 times, this is when experience really matters. Because at the end of the day, integration in particular is so mission critical to a business that if it is not architected properly for things like load handling and things like failover and failback and things like error handling and the queuing of data and making sure that it comes in the right order if one of the endpoints falls over, or any one of 100 different scenarios that we have to think about when we're thinking about system integration architecture. If the person who is consulting with you on that is not aware to even consider those things, then it's most likely going to end in tears. And so that's where, as you say, having a back office coder who can maybe whip up a piece of middleware, a microservice to connect one API endpoint to another API endpoint, that's all fine and good. But if that person does not have an overarching understanding of all your systems, all of your data flows, and the consequences of integration failure and how that should be handled, or when there might be field limitations and validation restrictions in one system versus another system, so you've got to concatenate data between systems. If you don't have a very holistic understanding of all of these complexities, even if you can technically connect two endpoints together, it doesn't mean you're going to get the result that you expect.
Yep, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. It's a balancing act, and we typically find that once a client has made that selection and say we're working with them, we develop long-term and very solid, strong business relationships because we become intimately involved in their business and quite often quite central in terms of the number of different applications that they use to run their business. The integration sits in the middle and synchronizes and exchanges data between all all of those endpoints. So yeah, we build those long-term relationships with clients, and yeah, got quite a few that are very happy with us.
Love it. Now we're at the point of our conversation where I turn the tables on myself. I hand the microphone over to you. I let you ask me one question, any question, and I do my best to answer it. Doesn't even have to be business, or it doesn't even have to be related to the conversation we just had. Over to you, Mark Presnell from Convergence. One question, any question you like. Hit me.
Thanks, first of all, Jason, for the opportunity to join you on the podcast here. I'd like to know where you see, in what particular subsection, say, of e-commerce, where you see the greatest or the biggest opportunities for 2022.
It sounds like a broken record, and I know I do, and some people listening to this will have heard me say this before, but I genuinely believe to be, particularly in a decelerating retail environment, which I think we can all see the writing on the wall right now with rising inflation globally and ever more amounts of disposable income going to pay the mortgage for most people, and therefore less disposable income to spend on discretionary retail purchases. I think we're going to see a pretty big contraction at retail over the next 12 to 24 months. And I think B2B is going to pick up a lot of that slack. I think a lot of these B2B businesses that I'm seeing out in the marketplace today, because of the way B2B has evolved over the last decade to have such a heavy reliance on field sales and BDRs and BDMs, basically COVID had the perversely positive effect of breaking the back of that expectation, right? Because for almost 2 years or longer in many instances, particularly here in New Zealand, B2B businesses simply couldn't send people out into the field because either we were locked down or people were terrified of having anybody on site at their offices or their warehouses or their headquarters. And as a result of that, a whole bunch of that traditional in-person B2B sales stuff moved online anyway. Now, it didn't get automated. It moved to maybe, instead of in-person calls, to Zoom calls instead. But the expectation that you would always have a sales rep on your doorstep physically in person largely went away due to COVID. And I think that is going to have a tremendous downstream upside effect on many B2B businesses. And they will now be able to take the next step, which is to move to a largely self-service B2B sales model via e-commerce once the original relationship has been built. So once the field sales rep has closed the account and they're now an official B2B customer, they got their price list and they got their catalog and all that sort of stuff. Once that initial relationship building piece is done, and now we're really just talking about order replenishment more than anything else, I think that perversely positive effect on B2B of kind of forcing them to get with the program and get with the times, where a lot of these businesses were legacy businesses and relied on in-person relationships exclusively, that's going away. And I think that by definition means that many B2B businesses are going to execute on e-commerce capabilities over the next 1, 2, 3, 5 years. I think that some of the global information and data that's coming out says, I think one of the last pieces of data that I read was something like the expectation, at least in America, is that the B2B market is something like 20 plus times the size of the B2C market in terms of total money up for grabs, revenue up for grabs. So it's just a phenomenal opportunity. And I think we're going to see that evolve over the next couple of years.
Interesting. No, I tend to agree.
Mark, I seriously enjoyed this. Thank you for sharing your knowledge. Thank you for sharing your wisdom and experience. We've done a few projects together now, and it's always been a pleasure to work with you and the team and your technology. And I'm sure we're going to get many opportunities to work together more in the future.
I look forward to that. Thank you very much, Jason. Appreciate it.
Are you a merchant or software vendor that is focused on e-commerce or omnichannel? Then head over to greenwoodconsulting.net to see how we can help you scale your business.